Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Brecken Branstrader, and I'm the Senior Editor, Gemstones at National Jeweler. I'm pleased to welcome you to the latest episode of My Next Question, National Jeweler's webinar series. Today's session is hosted by Editor-in-Chief Michelle Graff and features John Kennedy, President of the Jewelers Security Alliance, and Gregory Smith, Executive Vice President and co-founder of Berkley Asset Protection. Before I turn the discussion over to Michelle and her guests, I just wanted to let our attendees know that if they have a question, they can drop it into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom of their screen. I'll be back on after the discussion to share any questions with our panelists. Also, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the National Jeweler website this coming Friday, November 19th. Now I'll turn it over to Michelle to get things started.
Brecken, thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, John. Hello, Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about store security around the holiday season and general crime trends. But first, before we get started, I wondered if you could introduce yourself to our attendees today. I think everyone knows who both of you are, but just in case there's anyone new joining us. And John, why don't you go ahead and start?
Hi, I'm John Kennedy. I'm the president of the Jewelers Security Alliance. It's a nonprofit trade association that gives loss prevention assistance and information to the industry, and we work with the police and the FBI on jewelry cases.
Okay. And Greg?
Yes, I'm Greg Smith. I'm Executive Vice President of Berkley Asset Protection. We give insurance products to jewelers across the country and world, for that matter, and I do loss control and claims.
Thank you both again. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about store security, and specifically today I want to talk about store security around the holiday season and event security. John, I know from conversations we've had in the past that actually less crime occurs during the holidays. Traditionally, now we're going to get to how 2021 may be different in a minute, but can you explain traditionally why that is?
Yeah, I mean, there was a myth that the December period was the worst time of the year for crime, but it is actually not true. There are some categories of crime where some years it is the most highest month, but for most and virtually all the rest of the time, it's either in the middle or even at the low end. But there are a lot of countervailing factors here, which I'll just say for a second. One of them would be that criminals don't really work on a fiscal year. I mean, they look for risk. They look for low risk. And so if you say that stores are more crowded and malls are more crowded during the holiday season, that might put off some criminals. It might allow some crimes to happen. For example, distractions, it's more confusing, maybe you can do it. But in terms of having a lot of people around, most criminals do not like having a lot of people around.
Because for example, if you're going to go into a mall jewelry store and grab a piece of jewelry and run, your job of getting out of the mall is going to be a lot easier if there's not as many people. You have to weave around as many people and all of that.
Right. I mean, you're also afraid that other customers might intervene. We've seen this. Other customers take out a gun and do something very bad. But also you have some seasonal personnel in the store. A lot of companies will have seasonal personnel. So having more personnel in the store, while they may be untrained, may also put off the criminals a bit. And there's too many personnel working here. The main factor, though, I think the main factor that influences this, and this is not, this will be every year, is that the staff and the owners are more harassed. They're working harder, they're tired, they're working longer hours, and they may try to cut corners. And that's the worst thing that can happen when they start cutting corners on security, and that provides the opportunity for criminals to step in.
Okay. Greg, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think John hit the main point, which is that the stores are busier, which makes it more problematic for the thieves' exit. I would say that the volume of grab and runs will go down during the holidays normally. But what you do get is jewelers tend to ramp up their inventories. So there's an accumulation of risk at some jewelers. So it lends itself more to a nighttime burglary versus a daytime robbery, because the people create obstacles that the bad guys don't want to necessarily run over. So they're more apt to try to hit a store at night during the holiday season.
Okay. So now we know that this, the last 2 years have not been typical. So let's look at then holiday season 2021. November, we're already in December. John and Greg, what do you expect to see in terms of jewelry crime this year? Like normal amount of December jewelry crime, more or less? Do you have any thoughts on that? And Greg, we can start with you.
Yeah, one of the things that's still prevalent in certain states versus others is there's still the wearing of masks, which 2 years ago, if someone walked into a jewelry store with a mask on, you automatically knew a bad guy has now entered your store. Now someone can walk in with a mask, a hoodie, and it would be just them walking into the store. So I think that lends itself in certain cases to a potential rise. But in general, it seems based on the economic reports that people are going to the malls, people are shopping in the stores. I'm seeing lines already in the malls. So to me, it seems like the busyness will continue because the economy is doing well.
And because people are frankly tired of being at home, like they want to
100%.
go back out to a mall and
They want
shop
to hit
and
the
see
malls.
people
They
want to
wanna
have
hit-
that Black Friday doorbuster experience again. Not me
Exactly.
particularly, but other people.
But I think that is going to lend itself to why the grab and runs may diminish a little bit during the holiday season. But the nighttime burglaries will always be a factor due to the accumulation of risk.
Okay. John, what are your thoughts on holiday season 2021?
Actually, I was in a mall. I was in a mall Sunday and in Sunday afternoon, and it was packed. I mean, it looked like even more crowded than, frankly, than you would expect. It's not quite the holiday yet, but it was packed. I agree with Greg.
Which is interesting because malls had been experiencing such a decline in foot traffic. But like I said, I think people are just wanting to get out again. And if that means
They want to
going to the
buy.
mall, what's that?
Stuff. Yeah. No, I agree with Greg, but I think that the broader crime trends that we've seen this year will trump the seasonal trends. In other words, we're seeing a great number of grab and runs, great number. I mean, more than usual, and noticeably more. And, it's due to the things Greg said, masks and whatnot. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that continue over the holidays, even with respect to crowds. And, we also, this year we're seeing an uptick in, nighttime burglaries that are not just breaking the window, but, part of that could be one of them, but really going after the safe, disabling the alarms, and doing
A more
that sort of thing.
sophisticated level of crime.
Sophisticated level of burglary, where they're really after the safe. They're not just going to smash a window and grab what they can. And we're seeing this particularly from stores next door that are vacant or they're coming in from the roof. But we see a noticeable increase in it. And I think that those trends, I mean, we're still talking, it's not like there's thousands of them out there, but
Right.
these are the risks that I would be particularly concerned about for the holidays.
And before we continue, I want to get commentary on two things. Number one, is there anything retailers can do about the masks, particularly if you live in a jurisdiction where masks are required indoors? And two, John, or Greg, what are your tips for, preventing grab and runs to the extent you can and preventing rooftop and safe burglaries to the extent you can? We'll start with the masks.
I mean, the issue with masks is it differs by geography and how your community feels about masks and how they feel about taking off masks and all of this. We're reluctant to give one size fits all at JSA. We're reluctant to give one size fits all advice on this because, I mean, you're in business to sell jewelry. You want to be protected, you want to have security, but you're in business to sell jewelry. You don't want to completely aggravate your clientele, put them off, have them not come in. You want to sell jewelry. There are stores that require people to take their mask off before they even enter the store. Okay. You can try it. Okay. There's people who have them take it off or just drop it down for a minute when they're in the store. And okay, I'm not advocating any of that. I'm advocating people have to do what they feel they have to do in their community. Masks, a masked person is obviously a greater risk. And you have to balance that risk off with your business interest. I'll just have to leave it at that.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, I would agree with John for the most part. I think you can do something to relieve the problem a little bit by, if someone wants to see a piece of jewelry, which I think I may be answering your second question, but if someone wants to see a watch or wants to, you would get their ID, you'd make sure, have them pull their mask down. You can literally take a photograph of them if you so please. But ultimately, it is a problem, because I would be, hard pressed as an insurer to tell people to take their masks off all the time, because, it could be a safety scenario. So we try to tell the stores to sort of act prudently, but also train your employees. If you think of Olympians, they train all day for their sport. Do we train our employees well enough to handle crowds? Do we train them how to deal with a customer who wants to see 3 rings instead of the 1 at a time scenario? So there's things that stores can do to at least minimize what could be taken, versus the way it unfortunately is they're trained very well in sales because that's their job, but they're not necessarily trained in defensive skills to defend against someone whose sole purpose there is to steal. And there are some simple methods, like only show 1 piece at a time.
Right.
Sure, you hold their license if they're gonna, because then they're giving up their ID in theory. It could be a fake license. But that's one very, very simple way of making sure that if you have a loss, it's somewhat muted versus handing them 3 Rolexes. And I do have a great case with putting 3 Rolexes on a person's wrist and the guy with an Olympic sprinter running out the door. So you have to be prudent. You want to make the sale, and that's their objective, but you got to do it wisely.
Okay. So Greg, I think you kind of alluded, like, as you said, you alluded a little bit into how to prevent a grab and run. And this is, John, you've repeated this advice probably 1,000 times in your career, only show 1 item at the time. Any other grab and run thoughts? And John, what are your thoughts on asking for an ID? Because I don't think I've heard that one from you before.
I think also it's another, it definitely is discouraging for criminals, although they will have a counterfeit ID undoubtedly. But nonetheless, does it work in your community? Does it work in your store? And, if there's a question of, you have to do it uniformly. You can't be asking some people for it and not ask others for it.
Yeah.
And, so you wind up with, other awkward situations. So if it's something you can do. So if you want to do it, give it a try. And if you think it works and it flies in your community and in your store situation, but otherwise, we don't make it as, again, a blanket one-size-fits-all recommendation.
Okay.
Other things you can do. If you're showing significant product, especially, you could have an additional sales personnel help you and stand on the other side of the counter, not to physically stop the person if they grab it, but just to act as a discouraging factor. They don't know that you might not try to stop them, and they want the least risk possible. So, you're not going to grab them, by the arm if they start taking something, but you're standing there and it can discourage them. And if you're suspicious of someone, you can have the rest of the crowd come, the rest of your team come from the back or from who are free at that moment to come over and, keep an eye on things too. It's discouraging, have somebody stand by the door. I mean, have tried to especially if you're suspicious now, try to have somebody think that they've been spotted and that you are aware that they are a risk. You know, the basic reason, the basic advice is, of course, show one item at a time. And,
Right.
you know, you don't leave a tray of rings on the counter. You don't leave, you know, stuff like that.
Don't leave the showcase open.
Don't leave, I mean, that's in terms of most other crimes too. I mean, it's leaving the showcase open, distraction thefts, sneak thefts, etc. It's so basic that you take, it's hard. I mean, when you're busy and there's a lot of people in the store, it's hard, no question about it. But if you don't lock that showcase when you take out a piece to show it to somebody, somebody is going to get into that showcase and take a tray or take multiple pieces, and you're not even going to know it because they're very good at it.
Right. So
And
I feel like we've
one
kind of
other
gotten
thing
into
that-
my next question already, which was what are some store basics people might have forgotten about, you know, because it's been for some retailers, it's been a while since their store has been crowded. So we've covered a few of the basics, you know, one item at a time, don't leave your showcases unlocked. Before we move on to events, are they any other good store security safety basics jewelers should keep in mind as we head into the holiday season? Anything we forgot?
I would say that you should always have two people opening and closing a store. That's a good safety measure. While you're setting up and you're taking down your stock, when you're usually trays on your counter, you really should have your doors locked and don't let anyone in, whether it be a client or whether it be a person who just randomly comes to the door, a shipping company, just don't let them in. And then, you know, I would say that you got to be cautious of groups of people that walk in at the same time. One of the things John said, which is really probably a paramount thing to do, if you're suspicious, you have to have a code word or something to alert your fellow workers to react. And what that would do is normally a lot of stores come up with a word. And what that does is it tells the other people what to do, because they know right away that you feel uncomfortable. Normally your suspicion is right. And you see them position themselves between the person and the exit. Because once they can't just walk there, you don't have to tackle anyone. Once they can't find the exit, they will normally abandon, because they're not looking for confrontation, they're looking to steal.
Right. John, any other basics?
Yes, I mean, I would, you know, the idea of looking for suspicious circumstances, to be aware that there's something suspicious going on and then have everybody go on alert is crucial. For example, if you have someone wandering around the store on their cell phone, looking at all your showcases and whatnot.
Right.
And whatnot,
from an engagement ring to a
and
watch.
they don't want help. You know, keep an eye on them. Is it innocent behavior? It can be innocent behavior, but a lot of time it isn't. They're casing your store. They're seeing if showcases are open. They're seeing where product is valuable, where it is. They're trying to find a vulnerability. You know, so that would be one thing. Especially like coming, you know, several people, 3 or more coming into the store at once. I mean, it can be innocent. It can be a family or relatives, or who knows who it could be. But oftentimes it's a gang working in concert. You know, I would say, you know, keep your safe locked in the back. Don't keep it open during the day. We see lots of open safes during the day, and people are able to get into them, you know, surreptitiously. And so that's not good. I would say, you know, it's nice. I mean, in a mall, you can't do it, but in a freestanding store, I mean, what should they do? They should have something on the door that's going to alert them noise-wise that the customer has come in. A little bell, a little tinkle, a little something that they know that they have a customer in the store and somebody has come in, especially when they're waiting on somebody else. They may not even notice. They may be distracted. You know, those are just a few things to think about.
And what about people talking on their cell phone in a store?
I mean, it's lots of people talk on the cell phone in the store. Lots of people take pictures of jewelry with their phones in the store. But, it is one of the characteristics we see of, for example, of a grab and run person, because they're talking to their confederate outside the store to see if their path is clear and if they'll be able to make it out clearly. You have to have a rule of reason. You have to, use your judgment. Jewelers are, after a while, you work in a jewelry store, you do develop, most people do, like a sixth sense. There's something amiss here. There's something amiss here. And that's what you have to really be careful of, because believe your sixth sense, because you're probably onto something. And getting the whole crew out to watch the suspicious circumstances is very helpful in discouraging of crime.
Yeah, and I think that code word, Greg, that you mentioned is a great idea. And I know, John, you've suggested that before, like having something. So even if you're the elder statesperson to say, for example, and you're the only one who's kind of like senses are heightened, if you use a word, everyone else knows to be on alert too.
Yeah.
Don't leave the keys in the showcases. If you have keys, don't leave them in there while you're, and we see this all the time. It's not like uncommon. Don't leave the keys in. Obviously, don't leave them unlocked, which we said. And, you can't have product just, some people display product out altogether. And you just can't do that. At night, and another thing, if we're talking at a retail store at night, don't leave exposed product in showcases, because, it just acts as a magnet for criminals. At least, you should try to get it in your safe or vault or whatever you have, but at the minimum, don't have it visible. Put it away in the closet, lock it up, put it in drawers, lock it up. Don't put any kind of a covering or a cloths type things over your showcases to think that, we're closed. The idea is people will think there's something underneath.
Right.
And, or they don't know that there's something underneath. So it acts as an additional magnet. Keep the lighting on, have good lighting overnight, Don't have your windows so decorated also with, Santas and things like that, that you can't see in, so that you can't see in from the street. There's at least some protection.
Some visibility.
Some visibility inside the store. We do see that. You put, Santa things, trees and things like that. You can't see into the store at all. And it acts as, it's good for burglars,
It's good cover.
Yeah. The other thing is, seen, a lot of political unrest in the country and civil unrest. So that becomes another whole avenue jewelers now have to face mainly in the cities. During George Floyd's post, the situation out there, many jewelers did get robbed. And the problem of those robberies weren't just the fact that they went in and stole the out of safe property, which is mainly what they did, was that they did a lot of destruction to the casework and things like that. And now, given our supply chain issues that we're all facing, whether it be your alarm or your cases and all this, it could really have significant disruption to a business. So what, if, for argument's sake, you got to be close to your local police department, because they do know that things are coming. They have good intelligence. And if you're close to them, they'll call you ahead of time and say, yeah, we have knowledge that there's going to be some protests in your area. At that point, it's incumbent upon you to take everything out of these cases and put them in safes, or take it home for that matter. But don't leave it in harm's way, not because it's not covered by insurance, because it is covered for whatever out of safe limit you have, but because there is a disruption factor I don't think people really think about. And especially now during the holiday times, this is a time you can't really afford to have that disruption.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because you may not be able to replace all product or replace your showcases as quickly as you'd like.
Exactly.
John, any thoughts on that?
No, I agree with everything Greg just said.
Okay. I want to move on now. Let's talk a little bit about events. So you're having, there could be more customers in the store, people you don't know in the store because they've just been invited to your event. there's also extra people. There's maybe waiters, there's musicians, alcohol might be being served. What should retailers, some of whom might not have hosted a big party in their store since 2019 and might be a bit out of practice, what should they keep in mind about event security specifically?
I would have two thoughts on that, basic thoughts. One would be keep those showcases locked when the people are there, and well, three things, let's say, have enough personnel to handle what's going on. And I would hire a guard. I would hire a reputable guard or an off-duty police officer, preferably, to be at the store during a special event. I mean, if it's a couple of hours, okay, so you're spending a couple $100. And I think that it would provide, it's not just, provides a calming effect for the whole thing. And also that person doesn't have to sell product. They can just use their eyes to just view the whole event and see if anything's wrong. It's not even even a crime thing, but it could be, I mean, is it getting too crowded over there? Is somebody getting drunk? Is somebody rowdy? I mean, things can happen. So I think a guard would be called for a holiday party. I like a guard.
Maybe even more than one if you have a really big store and
If
you're
you have a
expecting
big
a lot of
store,
people.
yeah. I mean, if you're some huge store somewhere, I would say multiples.
Okay, so a guard, you mentioned a guard, keeping the showcases locked. Was there a third item?
Yes, you just make sure you have enough of your personnel there.
Enough personnel. Okay,
Make
enough
sure you have
personnel.
enough of your personnel. Obviously,
staff to guest
don't drink too much. Don't drink too much.
As the host, don't drink too much.
As the host.
I think
Definitely.
that's always a good idea, no matter where the party is going on, right? Whether it's your house or your store. Greg, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, John really hit the main points. Your staff to guest ratio has to be reasonable based on the size of your store. But the guards act as a true deterrent, whether they're armed or not armed, because they're sort of normally pretty bulky and sometimes dressed as guards. So everyone knows who they are, and their focus isn't on selling. Their focus is really on looking for things. And they may be things, as John said, that aren't physical, like someone stealing. Could be as there could be a medical emergency in some of these cases, and that's their focus is really on the people. And I would also say that if some people, a lot of these events off store, so they may go to hotels, they may go to private homes. You don't know where the jewelers are going to hold some events. So even in those cases, you import what you need to import to any venue you're going to.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do either of you worry about jewelers being kind of out of practice with events and or attendees? Because I feel like in some cases I see reports about how people behave on airplanes or behave in stores, and I have to wonder a little bit if, like, we maybe perhaps a little bit forgotten to how to behave ourselves in public. Like, do you worry about any of that for the holiday season?
I'm still worrying about super spreader events. That's why I'm not too happy about that. I hear about weddings and I hear about people getting sick. I hear about other things. I mean, they're vaccinated and they're not going to die, but you hear about people being sick. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just a bigger event with more people wearing masks than not. And as John said, there's obviously the simple health concern, but you just have to keep your wits about you, and look for things that truly don't make sense. Everyone has what's right and wrong, and what you take a snapshot in your brain. You say, "Geez, I should have realized that person was off on their own. Why are they standing over there?" And you realize that that's where your watches are and everyone else is somewhere else. And that may be a group of people, manipulating the crowd. So I think in general, jewelers have a good sense of, how people should be acting. With the mask, it does create just a little bit of uncomfortableness because you're really not sure who everyone is all of a sudden. But I think in general, I think jewelers, muscle memory comes back.
Muscle
And
memory, yeah.
You know what to do, and you know how to take care of everything, and just act prudently. Feel something's wrong, most likely something is wrong.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. So I also want to talk about, we know that the pandemic kind of pushed retailers to update their business models a little bit. They're offering more services. Like I know one of the big ones that a lot of jewelers like and have already said they're going to keep past the pandemic is this kind of drive-by pickup. You pick something out on the website, you buy it, and then, or you call the store and buy something, and then instead of coming in the store, you just drive by and pick it up. What should jewelers keep in mind security-wise about this practice of taking jewelry out to the car to someone, to a customer?
Should I say?
Yeah.
It's interesting that, it is a question of concern. And JSA was very concerned from the beginning when we started to see a lot of curbside, but I'm hard pressed to even think of even one case where it's resulted in a serious crime.
Okay, that's good.
I may be wrong. I mean, there may be one out there or two out there that I forgot, but it's not like something that's happening at any frequency or at all. The things to keep in mind are you don't want to have to travel too far. You want to give it very close to the store. You want to just be able to go outside and give it to them, be able to pull up very close to where you are. You don't want to be too ostentatious. You don't want to be too make it too big a deal out of it that you're carrying something valuable and whatnot. I mean, you might want to have, well, you certainly want to look out or have another person as well, look out the door and see if there's any suspicious things nearby. Yeah, are there people standing there, around there, or, in a nearby car that looks suspicious? You might want to have somebody, stand at the door and somebody go out and give it to the person in their car. Those would be the kinds of things. You might want to have a time set up, beforehand, that you have to come at a certain time. What kind of car do you have? What's your license plate? So I'll know who you are. People seem to have done this.
Ask for an ID.
ID. People seem to have done it very, efficiently, and seems to have done it very well.
Good. No, that's good to hear. Greg, any additions to curbside pickup?
Yeah, I would say that curbside, you just got to be smart, as John said, and have a trailer behind the person who's going to deliver the product. But yeah, you have to identify the people, which is, you get into the credit card fraud scenario that you run into every once in a while, where people using false credit cards, and then someone picks up and they say, I'm sending my driver to pick this up, which is, unfortunately, I did have one of these. And the store came right out. They delivered the watch and goodbye watch. And then the credit card company 2 weeks later removed the money from their account because it was a fraudulent credit card. But in that case, they didn't do anything to even identify who the driver was. And it was a very casual transaction versus, because you're now going and handing it to someone that isn't the client, that can be problematic, because what if that wasn't my driver? What do you do? So I would say that you'd prefer to only deliver to the known customer, because at least known customers, you can say, well, I know this person, I deal with them a lot. It's a little different than the shipping problem that, is really the next version of, unless you're doing curbside pickup, you're really shipping to the person. And
we're going to talk about that next, selling jewelry online and shipping.
That's another whole stress.
That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
So let's get into that though. We all know jewelers, I mean, everyone, all retailers, but in the jewelry industry, both retailers and designers, they're selling more jewelry online now for obvious reasons. What are some security measures to keep in mind when you're shipping jewelry purchases? And we know some retailers, we know brick and mortar for a long time now, have huge online businesses. Greg, do you want to start?
Yeah, I we have seen a market increase in theft. Now, what what's happened during COVID is this is actually created because there's no signatures really being required. They say they are, but they're not getting them all the time. And I think now the shipping companies are trying to charge, just say $2 or $3 for the signature. And that's eating into margins, and sometimes they're not getting it. But what we see is this gives rise to 3 avenues of issue. It's going to get lost in shipment just as it would any other shipment. It gets to the door and the person receives it, but there's no evidence they received it because they didn't sign for it. And they can say, I didn't receive it. Or third is someone leaves it at the door or with the doorman or somewhere else, and it gets stolen. And the third is probably the predominant of the stories. But the second can't be overlooked as being, it is being delivered, and the individual receiving it is saying, I didn't get it because there's no evidence they got. And we've used all different methods of trying to determine this, whether I know like Amazon and some others actually take photographs of them delivering packages to show they delivered it. We always ask to see if they have a ring system in the home or any video on the doorstep to either identify the thief. And if they say no, we sometimes send an investigator to see. And it may be a neighbor's ring camera that we use to identify the person walking out of their own door, picking the package up. So there's a lot of ways, this is happening. The question is, coming in to this big season, which really probably has already begun, the key is to try to get as many signatures as possible, immediate tracking, give the tracking number to the recipient once it's in motion, and then have them confirm they received it, preferably when they receive it. Just send a text or an email. So you then know that a package was actually received versus what I call virtually received, which is someone saying it was signed for. My favorite signature is COVID-19. That's my favorite signature people put on these, which means obviously no one's signing for the driver's sign. So I would say that the tracking becomes ultimately important, that you and your client are on the same page of when it's going to get delivered. And once it's delivered, just give you a confirmation that it was delivered.
Okay, yeah, that all makes sense. Just a note, actually, I used to use a grocery delivery service that took pictures of the order once it was delivered. They put everything down in your door, and before the man or woman delivering it left, they would take a picture. And they'd say to you, if you were opening the door, like, oh, I have to take a picture before you bring anything inside. So you couldn't ever come back and say, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, my order never came, etc. John, any thoughts on shipping security?
Yeah, I mean, I also hope that it even gets to the door because unfortunately we see over the years, significant theft internal to the shipping companies themselves. And in order to discourage that, I would say that when you ship something, you shouldn't be indicating that there's jewelry product inside, either from the return address or in any other way. Also, the size of it should be significant enough that it doesn't look like jewelry, so that it can look like clothing or it can look like shoes or whatever. Even add a little weight if you want. In other words, to not have that package stand out as one that's highly valuable and that I can just take and put in my pocket and get out of here. So, I agree with, certainly the things that have been said so far, but I think that, disguising the package is still significant, even if it's a neighbor stealing it. I mean, they may be less inclined to steal, a pair of shoes than they'll be to steal a nice watch or a pair of earrings, and I just think that you have to do those things if you're the retailer shipping to somebody.
No, that's a really good point. I didn't even think of that. Before, I know we've had a lot of questions come in here, and it's about 20 till 3 now. So before we move into the Q&A, the one last question: are there any current crime trends that jewelers need to be aware of heading to the holiday season? And John, I know you mentioned already about grab and runs, but is there anything else?
The burglaries and the burglaries through the roof and through the sidewalls are trends that we see, things that are significantly up. And and they can be very catastrophic, those types of losses. Those can be losses where they get in your safe and, you have a huge loss, $1 million loss, $1.5 million. Those are the trends that we're concerned about.
Is there anything jewelers can do? I mean, obviously that's sophisticated crime. You can't eliminate it completely, but is there anything they can do to prevent it or even mitigate losses?
Well, I mean, the whole, I think it would be beyond talking about it here to talk about what, somebody preparing their store to prevent burglary. It's, it may be a seasonal risk right now, but it's going to take them a while to get everything up to speed, and it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen in the next 2
weeks. A week
weeks.
before Thanksgiving. It's a little too late this year.
Yeah, but I do think one thing that, John brings up the real point that these losses can be catastrophic. And the thing that we've seen over the years, and it's always the unfortunate one, because they cut through the roof or they cut through a wall, they cut the alarm wires, it triggers a loss of signal to the alarm company. The alarm company calls the subscriber, the jewelry owner. They say, okay, we've sent the police, and they wait for the police to go. The police go there and they look through the window, and hopefully it's not obstructed with holiday material, but they can see in, and they don't see anything because the bad guys are either still on the roof or they're in a room that they don't have sight to. So they leave. Now the alarm wires and radios are cut. No one's actually technically responded to the alarm by going in and doing a proper search of the facility. And then the next day or the day, a lot of time that happens on Saturday nights, because Sunday they could be closed. In season, they don't close on Sundays normally. And then you end up coming in Monday morning to what is ultimately a very disappointing entry to your store, where there's dust and everything else because they've cut through the walls of the roof and into your safes. So one thing I would tell jewelers, if you've gotten false alarms, it doesn't mean you still shouldn't go down to the store. Preferably meet the police. Don't ever go in your store without the police being present if there was an alarm scenario, because they could take you hostage. But you have to react. Those alarms are there for a purpose, but they only act so far in your benefit if the wires are cut. So you got to respond in some fashion. I'll say it again: never go into a store unless the police are with you if there was an alarm scenario, or if you ever have any doubt who's on the other side of the door.
We see a lot of fooling around now with the electrical power boxes and fooling around with power, in order to disable the alarms and disable the cameras and whatnot. So as Greg said, I mean, I would say that the cardinal rule is that you have to respond appropriately, as he described, to every incident. But that means every incident. I mean, we have many instances, frankly, this year where it hasn't been an alarm condition, but it's been a technical problem of some sort. I think you have to respond to every kind of technical problem at this point. Every kind of interruption and power interruption, or whatever it may be, that you should go down and with the police to the store and respond and enter and make sure everything is okay. We see too many people, they don't respond at all, or they say, it's just power went off briefly, or there was some sort of electrical problem. Well, it's not. It's people are actually targeted your store.
No, that's good advice. I'm going to leave that there then. And Brecken, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know, as we said, we had a lot of questions come in, and I want to get through as many of those as possible. So thank you, John and Greg, and please stay with us for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much, you guys. That was such an insightful and, of course, very important discussion for this time of year. Like Michelle said, we did get a lot of discussion and questions while you guys were chatting. Just as a reminder for our listeners, you can still drop questions into the Q&A box. Try to get to as many as we can in the next 15 minutes. So let's get started. I wanted to go back to one of your earlier conversations. It seems, if I had to guess from some of the questions that came in prior to the start of the session with our registrants, there is a little bit of concern with masks and addressing that, as you guys were talking about. So we had one person who commented that he asks people, customers, to lower their mask for cameras and gets very little pushback. And I think his question was just, why more jewelers aren't doing that. And I know, John, you suggested that it's sort of a case by case, store by store basis. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that, but further, and to add on to that, we had a question that was, with everyone wearing masks, are there any suggestions for how security cameras can get good images of customers?
Well, I mean, at this point, not everybody is wearing a mask.
Right.
It's not required actually in Connecticut in stores now. So people aren't wearing masks here in my community. I stand by what I said before, that, there are stores that do it. And if you can get away with it and think it works and it's not going to hurt your business too much, then go ahead and do it. But, in some places, it wouldn't be too appropriate. Make sure you have good cameras that are not up in the ceiling and taking pictures of people's heads. But, I'm not sure you can do that, right now in the week before Thanksgiving. I mean, it's a more long-term solution that, we see tremendous numbers of pictures that are coming from the ceiling. They're getting pictures of people's tops of their heads, their hats, etc. They're not getting pictures of their face. What you want is a camera that can get people's pictures of their face, even entering the store, near the door, or exiting the store. Even you can get pictures of them, very good pictures. The potential of cameras today and the small size and where they can put them and whatnot is amazing. And you can get for modest costs, you can get very, very good cameras that will take facial pictures of people in your store.
Okay, great, thanks. Greg, anything to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, I think John basically hit it on the head that, it is a store by store, area by area scenario, but, just look out for signs that just don't make sense. Like if you're in the state of Florida and someone walks in with gloves on, and it's 90 degrees out, that's unusual. And you should be a little concerned that they have a mask on and rubber gloves on, or any kind of gloves on, in that type of environment. And therefore you should wonder if there's something wrong with that scenario. So, again, one thing I've always learned is hindsight's 20/20. The jeweler's intuition, it's 90% right at the time of an event. And even though they did get robbed, they knew there was something wrong. They just couldn't put their finger on it. And right away, they knew what was wrong. So you got to go with your feelings and your gut feelings on if something doesn't feel right, do something, say something, be more, hold the jewelry in your hand versus hand it to the person. There's a lot you can do to create control on the merchandise versus once you relinquish control, if the door is 4 feet away, that's all they have to achieve. They have to achieve 4 feet and then they're out. So just think about it logically. Put your more valuable property towards the rear of the store. And merchandisers may say that's crazy, but it makes it harder for the bad guy to get out. Just thoughts.
I just as to put this in perspective, is that prior to COVID, we would have, 600, 700 recorded grab and runs a year. Okay, so now we may have 800 or 850. The criminals are perfectly happy to do it without a mask, okay? So even if they don't have a mask on, you still have big risk,
Right.
because most of them in the past didn't have masks. So they're going to keep doing it. So
Right.
it is a help, but don't think it's going to give you protection from a grab and run person if they show their face.
Right. Okay. Well,
Very
thank you
true.
both. I mean, that makes sense. And I think this is very similar to another question that was, with in the case of where people are still wearing masks, how does security look for suspicious people? But it sounds like you guys are saying the same, the same things you always do. Just keep, listen to your instincts, the same security measures you always have. Is it the same, whether they're wearing masks or not?
Are they going around and they're not touching anything in your store? Are they not touching any glass showcases? Are they keeping their arms behind their back or keeping them folded the whole time? It means that they don't want to leave any prints anywhere.
Okay. Very interesting. Thank you. And to go back to the conversation about when you guys were talking about events, you recommended, maybe considering if it's right for the store, hiring a guard. But we had somebody who asked, should companies with high-end product consider full-time security?
High-end products should. Usually you find that they're a little bit more discreet. You see them, they're discreet in the sense that they may not be in a uniform, but they tend to be standing closer to the door. A lot of times they're the technical greeter into the facility. Sometimes they have them standing outside the facility. The higher end stores, it is a bigger target, depending on your method of entry. Like if you have a buzzer entry versus an open door policy, that there's different risk factors there. But definitely the higher end stores, it tends to lend comfort to some of your guests in the store. They come in and they feel there's a guard there and they feel safer because they know it's a high-end store.
Right.
So we normally see that. It's not a rule or a given, but it's a good thing to see.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then going back to, when we were talking about establishing a code word, a phrase or something like that to sort of alert your workers about somebody suspicious, we had somebody ask any suggestions as to how salespeople might convey your code word without alarming the thief or potential customer. Someone in the comments suggested using an uncommon name, and then that way a salesperson might be able to ask a coworker, has so-and-so called today? And it could be just sort of regular conversation. But do you guys have anything to add to that? Any suggestions for our listeners?
Right, that's something that could be said normally, but that wouldn't, but that sets it off. I mean, did Mr. Rosencrantz call about his ring today, whatever it may be, and just something that would be unusual but not seem odd to
Right.
a normal customer. And
Okay.
You don't want it to sound like an Eli Manning audible. Chicago. That would alarm someone.
Right.
Make it much more subtle and more everyday usage. But a word that a name is very good because you can use the name in multiple frameworks. So say, did Mr. Rosencrantz come in today? Do we know if Mr. Rosencrantz is buying this ring? Anything to use the name. So it gives you a lot more flexibility that because you have to think of it on the fly.
Right.
This is going to be happening in real time. And you got to remember the name of the word, and you got to have to formulate a sentence about it versus just start screaming it.
Right.
Wait, what is the Eli Manning reference? I don't get this.
He always,
Maybe I'm the only one.
He always said the same two words when he was audible in plays. It was how they would change the play at the line of scrimmage. He would always, I'm vague, I don't remember the word, but I'm sure someone in the audience does. But
we got a chat
Somebody
that said
said-
Omaha.
Omaha, that's right.
Uh,
Omaha, that was telling everyone that we're changing the play.
Oh, that's funny. And then going back to shipping, we had somebody who asked, is overnight better than second day or standard mail? As far as
I
you
mean,
guys know.
I would say the less time it's in the shipping centers, the better off you are.
Okay.
The less opportunity for someone to grab it.
Yeah.
Like don't ship over the weekend and things like that. So, I
Right.
mean, I agree that the shorter the period of time, the less it's out there. I mean, this is how much that would reduce it, I don't know, but I
Right.
think it's better.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And any suggestions for traveling salespeople or any trends? I think we know JSA has spoken a lot about this over the past year, that there's been, a slight uptick in traveling jewelry salespeople. So any trends that are standing out as a red flag and tips for those people to keep in mind?
Well, I mean, there has been a slight uptick. It's still vastly lower than it was, many years ago, or a number of years ago, but it's still, there's an uptick. Are you being followed? Make sure you're not being followed. Don't leave stuff in your car unattended. Don't take goods home. Try to have them stored, or don't the usual panoply of recommendations we've made about traveling salesmen. It hasn't been changed by any new technique or new methods.
Mhm.
We may, well, actually, possibly one that we do have some documented cases of people putting a GPS on a car of a salesman and following them. We do have cases. It used to be, we thought we might have cases and we couldn't really find them, but now we've had a few. And so, make sure check under your car once in a while, make sure it doesn't have, somebody's put a tracking device under your car.
Would that be something you
wow.
can easily spot? I don't know what one looks like. Sorry.
I'm told that it's, if you had it on a rack, or if you were willing to crawl underneath it, you could probably spot it. That's what I'm told.
Yeah, they're that big, and they usually have some form of lighting to show that there's a signal. But reiterating what John said is, the risks for salesmen are really when they're entering, exiting stores, and when they're entering, exiting the places that they're staying. So hotels or your home. So if you're a typical traveling salesman, you're going to go to places, preferably not pre-announced, unless there's a rationale for that. Because if you tell everyone you're coming, you most likely are, if one of those people are bad, you're going to get picked up. The other thing is the bad guys, unfortunately, can identify a salesman, because not that they all look physically the same, but carrying bags into a store, they're in there for a period of time and then they come out. That is unfortunately where some of them get picked up. So if you stand outside, and even anyone on this call, if you stand outside a high-end jeweler, on the course of a day or a week, you'll probably see 2 or 3 salesmen walk in and out. And if you're a bad guy, you can pick them up. And these people travel in gangs. They're not normally one-off perpetrators. There's usually 3, 4, 5 of them. There could be 1 to 3 cars. So you got to be very well aware of your surroundings. Don't be predictable. Unpredictable is good. And if you ever have a thought you're being followed, drive to the nearest police station and dial 911. I'm on my way. I feel like I'm being followed, and you just go to the nearest police station. Don't think you're wrong, because you're probably not. Something tipped your brain off to think you were being followed. If you're at a store and it's time to leave and you're uncomfortable because maybe that area has had issues, just armored car your property back to your store, back to your home office, and regroup. I know that this is the hassle part of the world, but do whatever you can to be prudent. If you ever have a feeling, I can promise you have a feeling, it's most likely a real feeling.
I have one that I'd like to throw in as a very simple one,
Please.
is that you should follow and you should carry out evasive driving skills before every sales call and after every sales call, and before going home or before going back to your office and when you leave the house. In other words, this is not a big elaborate procedure, but it would be, drive around the block once and see if people continue to follow you. Make sharp left turns or even U-turns and see if people continue to follow you. Pull into a fast food place and do they pull in with you? See if they're following you or one or more cars. In other words, a huge number of these cases result from being followed to the store, from the store to your house, wherever it may be. And so following evasive driving techniques, I think is wise. And we're not talking about for half an hour. It takes 5 minutes. So you do that and you hope, and you still keep being very careful, you hope you've shaken any tail that's on you.
Right. Okay, great. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but I want to thank our guests, John and Greg, again for being here today. We really appreciate it. And to our editor, Michelle, of course, for hosting. Thanks to our audience members for tuning in today. My next question will be back on Tuesday, December 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern, where our fashion editor, Ashley Davis, and fine jewelry specialist, Joanna Hardy, we'll dive into Hardy's book called Sapphire, which is the final in her gemstone trilogy. You can sign up for that session on our site. I just dropped the link in our chat for anybody who's interested. Thanks again for joining us today and take care.